Just over 100 years ago, Britain was fighting for its life. For the country, this was monumental. For artists, it was the moment of truth. We began our journey to our local town, Shoreham by Sea, in which it held one of the biggest training camps in Britain. Soldiers that enrolled were brought here, not just from our country, but in fact other parts of the Commonwealth, including South Africa. Shoreham Army Camp trained, entertained, and healed men preparing for war. It was this camp where one soldier took the first step in changing his life. This man, A.Y Jackson, a treasured Canadian painter and founding member of the Group of Seven. Jackson made a compelling contribution to the development of art in Canada. In 1914, Jackson struck up a correspondence with the two Toronto artists, often debating on topics related to Canadian art. Jackson soon began visiting Toronto, joining the painters who would go on major trips to Algonquin Park, Georgian Bay, Algoma and the North Shore. Like the other group of seven painters, Jackson embraced the landscape themes and sought to develop a bold style. An avid outdoorsman, Jackson became good friends with Tom Thompson, and the duo often sketched together. With the outbreak of war, Jackson wrote in his biography, he remembered seeing a poster which ended any doubts he had in enlisting. We skip ahead 2 years in June Maple Copse, Belgium 1916. Jackson was injured in the front line. The result from this was travelling around England in various hospitals including Norwich, Brundall and Epsom. It was after being on light duty for 3 months in the Army Post Office at Hastings, where Jackson was eventually transferred to the Reserve Battalion at Shoreham. Jackson states that he has no pleasant memory of his stay. He describes the camp has not enough food and too many military police. Further on from this, the soldiers, who were mostly convalescent casualties, were drilled and disciplined by men who had not been to France. It is most interesting to see that Jackson's memory of the camp was when an air raid warning was sounded. The soldiers were ordered to stay indoors, while the boys spent their time praying the German pilots would find the camp and drop a bomb on the commanding officer. For A.Y, Shoreham were dark days. They drew worse when Jackson received a letter from J.E.H. MacDonald informing him that an artist was missing in the canoe on Algonquin Lake. This man was Tom Thompson. For Jackson, this was a tragedy. The thought of the war ending and the both of them going back to the North Country on painting trips was over. War records were formed for the purpose of making pictorial recordings of war achievements. It was Fosbury who convinced the organiser of the records, Lord Beaverbrook, to shine light on the Canadian artists in the records. Beaverbrook was engaged in the idea, but did not know of any artists. After Fosbury's travel to Red Cross office, it was a friend of Jackson's that directed Fosbury to Shoreham. Dark days became brighter, as one evening Jackson was ordered to the Sergeant Major's hut. There he met Captain Fosbury of Ottawa, a man who disregarded Jackson's salute as they are artists together. It was this meeting that began Jackson's first step into becoming a war artist.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and, for instance, where you grew up?
Right, well, I'm Michael Donin, and I'm Deputy Mayor of Worthing this year, and will become the Mayor of Worthing for next year. I was born in Canada. I was born in Toronto. So although I was born in Toronto, I actually was raised in Montreal, because after I was born, I was parked in Montreal with my grandparents who were living there at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I spent the war with them.
Education must have been a huge part of your life. Did you learn anything about A.Y Jackson, or was taught anything about him during your time at school?
I have to be perfectly frank with you that I was more interested in things like history, geography, and things of that nature, as opposed to art. Art and music at that time I didn't really look at when I was very young. I hadn't discovered things like ballet or opera, and more specifically the question you asked me was A.Y Jackson and art itself. So what I had to do is, because I'd heard of art in the sense of the seven great artists in Canada when I was in school. But I never paid much attention to that.
No.
But I certainly would have heard of the seven because it was part of our history and culture. These seven great artists from that early period. So I had to do a little bit of studying on A.Y Jackson. Certainly Alexander Young, whom is the AK stands for, who was born in 1882, I did discover a few things about. And he had quite an interesting career because he was born in a very poor family of, I think, 6. And if I understand correctly, his father actually absconded and abandoned him.
I didn't know that one.
And he had to make his own way. And he became very interested in art, always was interested in art. And he then went on and studied in places like, would have been the Art Institute of Chicago that he went to. And he saved the money that he made at that time. And in 1907, he actually went to France. And it's my impression that, like myself, when I went to France, and he started to get exposed to the Impressionists, that's when he started to get interested in art. He probably went to places like I went to, like the Louvre, and the Musée d'Orange, and he was able to see some of the masters, the Impressionists of that time, like Degas and Cézanne, and other greats as well. And I think that actually helped to form part of his thinking on art. And then, of course, he got caught up in the war, and he joined up, and he became a soldier in the 60th Battalion, which was then stationed over in Shoreham.
That's it.
He then went off to France and became injured. His injuries were sustained at the Battle of Sanctuary Wood. Battle of Sanctuary Wood. And he was sent to one of the hospitals over there, where he recovered. And the hospital's name was at Etaples in France. Where to from there? He was then discovered because he was in the trenches, and I was told he was digging latrines. I don't know how true that was. Maybe he was on KP duty or something. But then he was discovered somehow by Lord Beaverbrook. He actually then became part of the group of 7. And their paintings actually are hung in the National Art Gallery in Ottawa.
Yeah.
Which is, of course, as you know, is the national capital of Canada.
Exactly.
But if I can actually return us back to the First War, when he was with the 60th Battalion, became injured, and was doing some of his paintings on behalf of the Canadian Army for posterity, to record what Canadians were involved in and the battles they were in during the First War. Some of the paintings that he did, and I have got them here, and you must have them as well.
We have seen some.
And it would be it was a painting of the cathedral at Ypres, which is one of the major battles the Canadians fought in. The House of Ypres, and Ypres was virtually decimated and totally destroyed during the war through the shelling of the Germans.
It's great. And how do Canadians remember A.Y Jackson today?
Because you've said a lot about him yourself, but how do you think
other people?
I think that Canadians remember A.K. Jackson and his contribution. In fact, he was actually awarded one of Canada's highest medals. In fact, it is the highest medal. It was basically a replacement for the MBE, because Canadians were awarded the same kind of medals as the British people were. And he was awarded that for his contribution towards Canadian culture. And his paintings, as I've already mentioned, are hanging in Ottawa, in the museum there. And I would say that hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Canadians have already visited the Canadian Art Museum and have noticed the works of the Canadian 7.
As you may know, we're studying Shoreham Army Camp. which you may know a little bit about or may not. Is there anything that you know and would like to share with us?
About the Shoreham Army Camp, I know that there were an awful lot of Canadians there who did a lot of good things and a lot of nasty things. A lot of them like to drink beer.
Yeah.
They probably discovered English beer because Canadian beer is not the same as English beer. It's basically lager, and English beer can be a lot stronger. And I wonder whether the Canadians could really take it. And of course they loved a lot of the local sites.
Sure.
Certainly a lot of the local sites that were female at the time. And as I said, I think that a lot of the Brits will remember Canadians as being overpaid, oversexed and over here. But certainly the Canadians did and provided a great contribution to the war effort in the First World War. And I think that they certainly part of English history locally over here. And from what I can understand, there are still bits and pieces and artifacts and traces of where they were and how they lived and even how they died. And many did. But nevertheless, I'm proud of my Canadians who are over here in the First World War. I'm proud of the contribution that they made, and I'm proud of the fact that many Canadians actually can trace their roots originally back to Britain, to southern England, and to other parts as well, like Scotland and Ireland.
Oh, brilliant.